It's been a few days since the release of Path of Exile 320 Forbidden Sanctum, and so now it's time to explore which builds have been thriving across the various game modes. I know Ruthless just added a whole bunch of modes, but Ruthless isn't really my deal, so I'm going to be excluding it and instead looking at Softcore Trade, Hardcore Trade, Softcore Solo Self-Found, and of course, Solo Self-Found Hardcore. And just going over some of the popular builds in each. Popular doesn't mean best, although it is often a good indicator, and why they're so popular. So without further ado, let's start with Softcore Trade. And right at number 1 you can see Seismic Trap, which is pretty interesting, because Seismic Trap isn't that much better than it was in 319. A lot more people are playing it, despite it being arguably worse for the league mechanic. Is it still a good build all around? Yes. Is it still very easy to scale damage? Yes. Is it a build I'm ever going to play again after playing it in 316? Nope, not at all. I think the main difference here isn't if the build changed much between 319 and 320, so much as the popularity around it changed. And who knows, if you're rooting for Seismic to get nerfed, that 11% means it's way more likely than the low percent from 319. Though I'm not going to get too much into a lot of these builds since they're probably things you already know. After all, Explosive Arrow has also been good for quite a long time. As I remember, it was most popular starting in 317, though it was plenty viable in 316 and even 315, and that popularity hasn't really changed all that much. The only difference that we're seeing is a bigger skew towards Elementalist and away from Champion, which makes sense to me. Champion always felt like more of a hardcore answer rather than a softcore solution. So I expect that we'll see more Elementalists and less Champions as the league goes on. Though don't count out those cheeky Hierophants or Tricksters either. And then we've got RF, which is a really interesting one, because even though the skill itself is about the same as before, the Ascendancy has changed a lot. We've gone from almost 100% Inquisitor to about 86% Juggernaut. So if you're looking to play RF Inquisitor, you can still play it, but it's a lot harder to league start and it's a lot harder to sustain your RF on little or no gear. And then if you go Juggernaut, your sustain is pretty much built in, plus your sustain gets even better as soon as enemies hit you. But expanding out a little bit from the few things we know, are there any surprises in the top 10? I have to say, for me personally, no, there aren't any surprises in the top 10, though I am quite happy to see that there's a good bit of build diversity outside the first couple. Yeah, Seismic's the leader at 11%, but it's the only double-digit percent one we've got. Next up, we have Hardcore Trade, which, meta-wise, isn't all that different from Softcore Trade. You've got plenty of Seismic Trappers, which again, are generally playing Poison. In Softcore Trade, you're going to see much more Cold Conversion, and that's because Cold Conversion is higher damage, but also because Cold Conversion is often built as a glass cannon that just falls over the minute a boss looks at it funny. Personally, I'm not a big fan of Seismic in Sanctum, not because of its strengths or weaknesses, but due to the fact that it clutters the ground, and that makes it much harder to dodge abilities that will damage your resolve. Next up we have Explosive Arrow, Righteous Fire, Exsanguinate, and Bone Shatter. Bone Shatter is in the top 5 here, just barely, so if you think Melee's dead, well, apparently all of these Bone Shatter players haven't gotten the memo. Now personally, I was rooting for Waggle's Trap build to catch on and take over the meta. Unfortunately, Hexblast Trap isn't really in the top percent, and this is probably in large part because, unfortunately, it has a lot of bugs, though I do think several of them are being sorted out, and despite the bugs, I'm pretty sure it's a super functional build. Nonetheless, it's really cool, and if you want to know more, Waggle's definitely the expert, not me. Now, zooming out for just a little bit, are there any interesting differences that I notice in comparison to Softcore? Well, the only one that stands out here is that Toxic Rain is decently popular in combination with Summon Raging Spirit. Toxic Rain has seen a lot of nerfs, it feels really bad for anyone who played it previously, but if you're a Toxic Rain newbie, then I could see it being good as gold. Then we have Summon Raging Spirit, which is the least minion build, or the minion build for people who hate minion builds. Overall, I've heard nothing but good things, so at some point I might even try it for myself. Nonetheless, I can say if you're looking for a minion build in hardcore, it's probably going to be your go-to. Alright, so I could just list off the top 3 again, but things haven't really changed. So instead, I'm going to skip straight to the point where I start talking about differences. The first one is Poisonous Concoction is a lot more popular. I think this is because Poisonous Concoction works when you're wearing Floor Trash. Some of the other builds do work without gear, but not nearly as well. Especially since we're talking about day 3 here, and a lot of people still haven't done their reroll even if they plan to start one thing and change into another. And I'm not sure how many of you occultists do plan to stay PC, or how many are just gearing up for something else. Though I do very much appreciate my Aura bot is Huck, since that's the only Aura bot you're getting in Solo Self-Found, and the new Atlas passives make it more than possible. Personally, I'm still a really big fan of the Pathfinder version, but I can definitely see an argument to be made for the Occultist one. The new Dawnstrider Greaves are a really cool inclusion, because you only benefit from one Ancestor Totem anyway. Causing the effect to linger is really nice if a totem dies or you just forget to recast it, because let's be honest, who can remember that thing? An 100% increased effect of buffs means you get a lot more attack speed, and a lot more attack speed means stacking more poisons means more damage. I also especially like this tree here. You get a lot of extra mobility and quality of life without coming to these nodes down here, which tend to be a little bit wasteful. It's not that they're bad, it's just a pretty far distance out of your way, and I'd rather go up here and grab something like Magebane, just like this player's doing. The other interesting note, Venom Gyre is way down. This means Venom Gyre's not very Solo Self-Found friendly, but Wave of Conviction is way up. Which makes sense. Wave of Conviction is how I leveled my character, and it was really smooth. In fact, I could easily have seen myself just continuing with Wave of Conviction, rather than switching over to Hexblast. The damage pattern is slightly different. Overall, most of the build is pretty much the same. If you compare this tree to my tree, you won't notice that many differences. Well, mostly just that I get the extra curses, and arguably the extra curses would be good, even here, because you can stack things like Flammability, Elemental Weakness, and Punishment. So, if you're looking for an Ignite build that works really well in Solo Self-Found, I suggest going Wave of Conviction Ignite. Now, normally, this is the point where I joke about being the hardest of the hardcore players. Unfortunately, that isn't the case anymore. The hardest of the hardcore are hardcore Solo Self-Found Ruthless Sanctum players. But if you want to see more about Ruthless, maybe a Ruthless video meta-analysis, that might be quite interesting since not a lot of people will be playing the skill of their choice, but more of a skill they're forced into by the support gems they find, then do let me know down in the comments below. For now though, what do I see that's really interesting? Well, one thing that I see is we have a Soul Rend enjoyer who is decently high on the ladder. Soul Rend got quite a bit of buffs last league to very little fanfare, and the skill's probably stronger than a lot of people give it credit for. After all, getting to 96 in Solo Self-Found Hardcore and sitting in the lower part of the top 10 is not an easy feat. But that aside, what's popular? Mostly the things you'd expect, plus Bone Shatter. Bone Shatter has long been a Solo Self-Found Hardcore favorite, since as long as you can survive your damage, you can probably survive anything, and Bone Shatter does a lot of damage, both to you and the enemies. One thing that is interesting is the popularity of Volcanic Fissure. I'm somewhat surprised since I've noticed that new skills usually don't catch on that well in Solo Self-Found Hardcore. I guess though with both Gucci and Quantric playing it, it was bound to do pretty well. Just taking a look at what Gucci's doing, big old two-hand slam build, which is exactly what I'd expect. Taking a look at Quantric, let's see if it's any different. Not really, although he does have a Perseverance, and Perseverance is an awesome item on pretty much any build. Oh wait, it is a little different. So instead of just going with a pure Fizz setup, we are going with a Trinity setup, which is a really interesting idea that should work very well. You can't shove in Nightblade, but hey, Fist of War is close enough, and at least you get to turn your enemies into lava. One thing that is really important to keep in mind with a meta-analysis on day 3, these are builds that are good for leveling, they're good in a low gear environment, and they're generally good at getting EXP quickly. This also means that more specialized builds, such as a dedicated boss killer, probably isn't going to show up, nor will an Endless Heister or a dedicated Sanctum runner. In fact, I don't think Sanctum itself, as a league mechanic, has had much of an impact on the meta. Most people are probably just not doing it if their build sucks, and doing it if their build is good for it, like with my own Hexblast Ignite, which you can see on screen now. Now, if you're looking for your day 3 reroll, I don't necessarily advise picking one of these builds just because it's popular. Although, in a lot of cases, popular does mean well documented, so if you really need a guide to hold your hand, then these aren't bad options. Although, if you need a guide to hold your hand, you should always try to learn from whatever you're playing and incorporate that into future builds. But personally, I find it fascinating that Seismic is as popular as it is. Maybe it's just the bubble of players that I sit in, but I know a lot of people who played Seismic in 316, or 317, or 318, or 319, and didn't really enjoy it all that much. It was strong, but not that fun to play. So I'm surprised to see so many people starting it now. And given how popular it is, with about 1 in 10 players playing it in softcore trade, I'm curious, are you playing Seismic Trap as your starter? And if so, why did you pick it over everything else? On the other hand, if like the vast majority of people, you aren't playing Seismic, why didn't you pick it? Let me know some of those thoughts down in the comments below. And before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. If you want something else to watch, YouTube will have a recommendation on screen right now, or if you're interested in my build, you can click through the card in the top right, where I have some videos documenting my progress and discussing my plans for the future. But that's all for me today. Hopefully you learned something. Hope to see you again soon, and remember, if you want to see a ruthless meta-analysis, do let me know down in the comments. Plus, while you're down there, be sure to get subscribed and leave a like.